What is the most shocking thing you discovered about a close friend? For years, our group had a ritual. Friday night karaoke, the same sticky booth, the same playlist, the same laughter, and every single week, she was the funniest part of it. She'd grab the mic with total confidence, and then butcher the song on purpose, off-key, dramatic, loud, like she was committing to the bit with her whole soul. We all thought that was the truth. She just couldn't sing. Then one night, the place was packed and louder than usual. The host announced a mini competition, and people started taking it seriously. Someone from another table made a teasing comment about our crew being brave. I saw something shift in her face, not anger, more like decision. She picked a song none of us knew, not pop, something slow and old. I thought, okay, another joke. She didn't joke. The first note came out so clean my brain refused to accept it. Then the second, stronger. The room around us softened like it was being turned down. Even the bartender stopped. People turned, then stood, then started filming. I looked at our table, everyone frozen, smiling but confused, like we'd slipped into the wrong timeline. When she hit a high note, it didn't crack, it didn't strain, it just landed, perfect. The kind of voice you only hear on a stage, not in a karaoke booth that smells like spilled soda. When the song ended, there was a half-second of silence, like the room needed proof it was real, then applause that didn't fit the space. Strangers were cheering for someone they'd never met. Our friends were staring at her like she'd been replaced. Back at the table, she was calm, almost embarrassed. I leaned in. "What was that?" She shrugged softly. "I used to train." "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I asked. She stared at the condensation on her glass and said, "Because then it becomes my whole personality. I just wanted to be normal with you guys." And that's when it hit me. She wasn't hiding a talent. She was hiding how much attention it could steal until the moment she couldn't pretend anymore. Next story. We were in a hotel lobby after a long workday, drained and half awake under harsh fluorescent lights. The check-in line was slow. Then an older couple stepped up to the desk, clearly lost, clearly stressed. They spoke in Japanese, quietly at first, then more urgently. The receptionist kept smiling and repeating the same sentence louder, like volume could translate meaning. The couple's shoulders tightened. The man pulled out papers. The woman's hands started shaking. I watched them go from confused to embarrassed in real time. That's when my colleague stood up. No big announcement, no, "I can help." She just walked over like she belonged there and spoke to them in smooth, natural Japanese, not classroom Japanese, not, "I know a few phrases." The couple's faces changed instantly, relief, gratitude, like someone had opened a window in a room that felt too small. She asked the receptionist a few questions, translated calmly, and within minutes the couple had their keys and directions. The man bowed. The woman bowed deeper. My colleague bowed back like it was normal. Then she returned and sat down. I stared. "You speak Japanese?" She blinked like I'd asked if she could drive. "Yeah." "How long?" someone asked. "A while," she said, sipping her water. We started firing questions. "Where did you learn? Why didn't you tell us? How many languages do you speak?" She raised a hand gently and said, "It's not a big deal." But it was. Not because she spoke Japanese, because she'd worked beside us for years and never let it slip. No bragging, no flex, no hint. Later, walking to the elevator, I asked quietly, "Why hide it?" She looked tired for the first time and said, "Because then everyone turns you into a tool, the translator, the helper, the impressive one. I just want to do my job." The elevator doors closed, and I stood there thinking about how someone can carry something huge and still choose to be invisible, until a moment arrives where being invisible would be cruel. Next story. My dad ran an antique shop, the kind that smelled like dust, old wood, and stories. We had regulars who felt like part of the place. One of them was a guy we all casually labeled the pig farmer. He looked the part, muddy boots, worn overalls, sun-browned skin, and a rusty truck that sounded like it was barely alive. He talked about pigs constantly, feed prices, fencing, how stubborn they were. He bargained hard over everything, like saving $5 was a victory. This went on for years, so when he walked in one morning wearing a perfectly fitted designer suit, I honestly thought I was hallucinating. Same face, same voice, but polished shoes, a crisp collar, an expensive watch. Dad looked up slowly. You okay?" The man checked his watch, smooth and practiced, and said, "I'm in a hurry. Plane's waiting." Dad laughed, expecting a joke. The man didn't laugh back. Then he added, casual, as if he was saying, "My ride is outside. Private plane. Needs to take off soon." He didn't browse like usual. He walked straight to an item he'd been eyeing for months, put cash on the counter, and didn't haggle. That alone felt wrong. Dad tried again, half smiling. "Where are you headed?" "Russia," he said. "Business." My stomach tightened. The shop suddenly felt too small for that sentence. I kept waiting for the punchline. It never came. As he turned to leave, I blurted, "What about the pigs?" He paused at the door, almost amused, found someone to watch them last minute, and then he was gone. The bell above the door ringing like it always did, except now it sounded like a warning. Dad and I stood there staring at the money on the counter. The shop looked the same, but our brains couldn't make the story fit. For years we assumed the simplest explanation. He was exactly what he looked like. That morning I realized something unsettling. Sometimes people aren't hiding who they are. They're hiding how much power they have until they don't have time to pretend. Next story. When he first told me, I believed him instantly. He said the word cancer, and my body reacted before my brain did. Cold hands, tight throat, a rush of fear. I asked the obvious questions. He had answers ready, too ready. He talked about appointments and meds and side effects. He mentioned tests, but never specifics. Every time I offered to drive him, he said no. Every time I asked to visit, he said he was exhausted. He posted vague updates that pulled sympathy from everyone. People sent money, people brought food, people cried. And then, slowly, doubt started growing under my concern. Not one big thing. 1,000 small ones. Details that didn't line up, stories that shifted, nothing concrete. I hated myself for it. Who doubts cancer? But the doubt kept getting louder. So I stopped asking gentle questions and started asking normal ones. "Which hospital? What's the doctor's name? Can I come with you?" He dodged. Then he got irritated, like my support was inconvenient. One night, I showed up at his place unannounced. He opened the door looking healthy and startled. For a split second, I saw pure panic flash across his face. That expression made my stomach drop. I stepped inside and said, "I need you to tell me the truth, right now." He tried to joke. I didn't smile. He tried to get angry. I didn't move. Then his shoulders sagged, like the lie finally got too heavy. He admitted it, quietly. He said he made it up because people finally cared. He said money started coming in and it became hard to stop. He said he didn't think it would go this far. I stared at him, waiting for my brain to turn the words into reality. I felt betrayed, but worse. I felt used, like every tear I'd shed had been stolen. I walked out without another sentence. Outside, the night air felt too cold, too clean, and I realized the most shocking part wasn't the lie, it was how easily he wore it. Next story. He was the definition of stable. The guy who showed up early, remembered birthdays, never forgot plans. We'd known him long enough that his life felt like a fact. Same job, same routines, the same partner in the background. Then the cracks started appearing in harmless places. He'd vanish on weekends. Not busy, not traveling, just gone. Calls went unanswered. Texts came hours later. Mondays he'd show up exhausted, like he'd been awake for 2 days. We blamed work, stress, family, anything that kept him in the good guy category. Then I ran into someone who knew him through a completely different circle. We made small talk, and the person casually mentioned his kids. I laughed. "He doesn't have kids." They looked at me like I'd said the sky was green. "Yes, he does, too." My heart started pounding. Not because I believed it, because suddenly I remembered every weekend he vanished, every call he dodged, every time he looked distracted when we talked about the future. That night I checked for any public trace, hoping to prove it wrong. And there it was. A photo from a community event posted by someone else. Him, standing beside a woman I'd never seen. One child on his shoulders, another holding his hand. His smile in the photo didn't look guilty. It looked normal. When I confronted him, I didn't accuse. I asked one clean question. "How many kids do you have?" The silence that followed was the loudest sound I've ever heard. His face didn't go angry. It went empty, like he was calculating what I knew and what he could still control. He admitted it. Another state, another life, about 1.5 years. He said it like it was a scheduling problem, not a moral collapse. Like he thought he could keep balancing forever. I left that conversation feeling sick, not just at the betrayal, but at how carefully he'd managed us, like we weren't friends, like we were compartments. Next story. He was my closest friend for years. The kind of friendship you don't question because it feels permanent. When he got engaged, I was genuinely happy. When he asked me to be in the wedding party, I felt honored. Months passed. Planning details floated around casually. I didn't push. I assumed the important stuff would come when it came. Then, a few weeks before the wedding, I asked a simple question. What time's the rehearsal dinner? The pause on the phone was subtle, but I felt something close. He cleared his throat. About that. I waited. He said, the dinner is kind of small. I laughed. No worries. Just tell me where. Another pause. Then, you're not in it anymore. The sentence landed wrong, like it belonged to someone else's life. I asked what he meant. He said they restructured. It was easier. It was nothing personal. Nothing personal. That's what people say when it's deeply personal. I asked when he planned to tell me. He said he thought I already knew. The lie was so thin it almost offended me more than the cut itself. After we hung up, I stared at the wall and replayed the last few months like security footage. Every time he'd been distant, every time he changed the subject, every time I felt slightly off and convinced myself I was imagining it. Then mutual friends started slipping up. Someone mentioned a group chat I wasn't in. Someone referenced a fitting appointment I'd never heard about. The more I learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't sudden. It was a decision that had been made and discussed while I smiled and asked how planning was going. At the wedding, he hugged me like everything was fine. Music played, people took photos. But underneath the celebration, I felt like I was watching the funeral of a friendship, quiet, polite, pretending the body wasn't there. And I realized something ugly and freeing. Sometimes you don't lose friends in a fight. Sometimes you lose them in silence. Next story. He was the friend everyone protected. The one we never pressured into expensive plans because he always seemed broke. If we wanted him there, we'd adjust the plan. If we wanted him badly enough, someone would quietly cover his part so he wouldn't feel awkward. He'd thank us with that grateful half smile that makes you feel good for doing the right thing. At first it was easy, then it became a pattern. Movie tickets, concert tickets, games, trips. He'd hesitate. He'd say, I can't. And we'd say, don't worry. He never argued much. He'd accept. I didn't find out he had money because he suddenly spent it. I found out because he was careless one time. We were hanging out and he handed me his phone to show me something. A banking notification slid down. I didn't read it on purpose, but the number was impossible to miss. It wasn't a paycheck number. It was a number that makes you blink. I handed the phone back too fast. Later, I confronted him, trying to keep my voice calm. Are you rich? He didn't deny it. He just said, I do okay. Okay? I repeated. You've let me buy you stuff for years. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like I was talking about borrowing a pen. Then he said the sentence that flipped my stomach. I never asked you to. Technically true. Morally disgusting. He explained he didn't like spending. He didn't want people expecting things. It was easier to let everyone assume he was struggling than admit he was comfortable. And he enjoyed being underestimated. Sympathy, generosity, lower expectations. After that, every memory replayed differently. Every time we adjusted plans, every time I covered him because I thought I was helping a friend, I realized I hadn't been kind. I'd been useful. And he'd been counting on that. Next story. During service, he was the smallest guy in our unit and somehow the loudest. Always joking, always bouncing like he had hidden batteries, making even the worst days tolerable. We assumed he was just immature. Near the end, we were packing gear when someone asked what everyone was doing after. People talked about school and jobs. Then someone looked at him and laughed. What about you? Going to join the circus? He didn't laugh back. He said, going back to work. What work? Someone smirked. Test pilot. The room went quiet in that slow way, like silence arrived one person at a time. I said, no, you're not. He nodded. Yes, I am. He explained that as a civilian, he worked with an airplane manufacturer, that he tested systems, performance, handling. He spoke like it was normal routine. No bragging, no dramatic tone, just facts. And that's what unnerved me, because the image didn't match. This hyperactive clown sitting in a cockpit, making decisions where panic could kill you. I asked, why didn't you ever tell us? He shrugged. Because then everyone asks questions. Like we're doing now, I said. He smiled. Same grin, but now it looked controlled. Then he said, "If people know, they treat you like you're special. I don't want to be special here. I want to be normal." Normal. The word sounded ridiculous coming from someone who flies experimental aircraft. After that, he went right back to joking around like nothing happened, but I couldn't unsee it. The confidence, the nerves of steel, the lack of fear, it wasn't childish. It was training. His jokes weren't immaturity. They were camouflage. Next story. We'd known each other since school. At some point, it stopped being friend and became family. Shared meals, shared holidays, secrets that never left the room. I knew their habits and moods so well, I thought I knew everything important. Then last year, we were cleaning out old boxes in a storage room. Dust in the air, cardboard smell, that nostalgia that makes you talk softer. They opened a long, narrow case like it was nothing. Inside was a violin, not a cheap instrument, a real one. Polished wood, cared for, the kind you don't randomly own. I laughed. "Since when do you play?" They didn't answer, just stared at it like it was a buried part of them. Then they lifted it out with practiced hands. No hesitation, no awkward grip. They tightened the bow hair like someone who'd done it 1,000 times. My stomach dropped. You can't fake that kind of familiarity. They placed it under their chin, adjusted their shoulder, and the first note came out so clean it made the room feel smaller. It wasn't someone who learned in school. It was controlled and emotional and technical, like the instrument was speaking through them. I stood there, frozen. The storage room didn't deserve that sound. The dusty boxes felt disrespectful. When they finished, the silence felt heavy. I finally whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" They shrugged. "It didn't matter." "It matters," I said, voice cracking. "You're incredible." That's when they looked away and said quietly, "That's why I didn't tell you." They explained they'd trained seriously for years. Competitions, pressure. The violin stopped being joy and became expectation. When they finally had a normal life, they didn't want the old spotlight back. I wanted to be angry, but it wasn't a lie. It was a boundary. And I realized I only knew the chapter where I was present. The rest of them existed long before me, silent, whole, and hidden. Next story. I hadn't heard from him in years. 10, maybe more. People drift. Life changes. Then someone messaged me. He died in October. I felt that delayed grief, and I searched for the obituary for something simple. Proof, a date, a goodbye. What I found didn't match the man I remembered. The obituary listed a wife's name I'd never heard. Not a nickname, not a familiar name that could be explained. A stranger. Then it listed children. 3. I stared at the screen, blinking like that could change the words. When I knew him, he didn't have kids. He barely wanted a houseplant. Now there were kids and 5 grandkids. Like he'd lived a whole different adulthood without leaving any trace in the version of him stored in my memory. I scrolled again, searching for an explanation. Maybe it was someone else with the same name, but the age matched. The photo matched. His face, older, but unmistakable. My chest tightened. The feeling wasn't just sadness. It was disorientation, like discovering a familiar street has been rebuilt while you were away. I reached out to mutual acquaintances. Most didn't know. A few new fragments. He moved. He got quiet. He started over. Nobody had the full picture. What haunted me was how normal the obituary sounded. Loving husband, proud father, devoted grandfather. It wasn't written like a scandal. It was written like a life. So where did we fit? Where did the version of him I knew go? I never got a clean answer. And that's what stayed with me. Grief mixed with confusion, mourning not just a person, but the fact that you can know someone for decades and still only know the chapter you were present for. The rest of the book can exist without you, quietly, completely, until the last page closes. Next story. We all had that one friend who seemed permanently available, always down to hang out, always texting back, always part of group plans. If he was dating, he never made it a big thing. We assumed he was either single or casual. Then someone accidentally said the wrong sentence in the wrong room. We were at a get-together when a friend of a friend asked, "So when is your girlfriend visiting again?" Our friend froze, just a fraction, but it was real, like his brain tripped. "What girlfriend?" I laughed, thinking it was a mix-up. The outsider looked confused. "Your girlfriend? From out of state?" Our friend tried to steer the conversation away, but now everyone was listening. Secrets have gravity once they're exposed even a little. Later, I pulled him aside. "Do you have a girlfriend?" He said no. Too fast. I didn't push right then. I watched, and suddenly the last few months rearranged themselves. Weekends he never planned anything. Late night calls he stepped outside to take. The way he guarded his phone like it held something fragile. A week later, I confronted him again. "Why are people asking about your girlfriend?" He stared at the floor, then exhaled like a man dropping a heavy bag. "Okay," he said. "Yes, I do." "How long?" I asked. 5 years. My face went numb. 5 years? And you never told us? He said she lived in another state. He visited when he could. It was complicated. He didn't want the jokes, the questions, the opinions. He wanted it separate. "Why hide her?" I asked. He looked up and said quietly, "Because if you all knew, it would become real in a way I couldn't control." That answer scared me more than the girlfriend, because it revealed the truth. He didn't just want privacy, he wanted compartments. And once you realize someone can live separate lives in separate rooms, you can't stop wondering what else is behind the doors you've never seen. Next story. He was functional. That's what fooled us. He showed up to work, laughed at jokes, texted back, looked like someone handling life, maybe tired, maybe stressed, but nothing alarming. So we didn't look closely. If he canceled plans, we assumed life. If he arrived late, we blamed traffic. If he seemed distant, we chalked it up to being busy. We missed the pattern: mood swings, missing weekends, bursts of energy followed by vanishings. Then one day, he called me and asked to meet. His voice sounded flat, like he'd reached the end of something. We sat somewhere quiet and he said, "I need to tell you something and you're going to be angry." I thought, betrayal, cheating, crime, something loud. He looked me in the eye and said, "I've been addicted for years." That word, years, hit harder than addiction, because it meant I'd been confidently wrong about someone I cared about. I asked what, how, when. He answered some things and skipped others. He wasn't making excuses. He was confessing like someone exhausted from hiding. He told me he'd gotten good at it, good at looking normal, good at knowing exactly how much honesty to sprinkle into conversations so no one suspected the full truth. Anger rose in me, then collapsed into shame. Because he wasn't describing a single lie. He was describing survival. He said the scariest part wasn't cravings. It was invisibility, that he'd been screaming inside while everyone saw fine, that he wanted help but couldn't stand being seen as broken. I asked why he was telling me now. He swallowed and said, "Because if I don't, I'm going to die." That sentence rearranged everything. All the times I'd been annoyed at his flakiness, all the times I'd judged his inconsistency, it suddenly felt grotesque. I didn't become a savior. I didn't fix him. I just did the simplest thing I should have done earlier. I believed him, and I took him seriously. And I learned something terrifying. The biggest disasters don't always look like disasters. Sometimes they look like your friend, smiling, saying, "I'm fine." Next story. If you met them, you'd never guess. Smart, polite, logical. The kind of person you trust with your keys and your secrets. That's why the discovery felt like my brain hitting a wall. I found out through a mutual connection, someone who mentioned it casually. "You know they're involved in that group, right?" I laughed. "What group?" They said the name, and my stomach tightened because I recognized it. One of those infamous religious movements people whisper about, the kind that shows up in documentaries. I said, "No, that's impossible." But the person wasn't joking. They described meetings, affiliations, phrases, and suddenly I remembered odd little moments. The suggests that they're busy on certain days, the strange reaction to certain topics, the way they'd use specific lines that now sounded rehearsed. The next time we hung out, I studied them like a detective, which made me feel guilty. Everything looked normal. Their smile, their laugh, their empathy. If there was a secret, it didn't leak. Eventually, I asked gently, "Are you involved in that group?" They didn't deny it. They nodded like I'd asked if they liked coffee. My mouth went dry. Why? They said it helped them. That outsiders misunderstood, that it wasn't what people think. They spoke calmly, like they were explaining a hobby, not something associated with control and manipulation. That calmness unsettled me. I expected shame or defensiveness. Instead, I saw certainty. Afterward, I left with a strange, split feeling. Part of me wanted to protect them, and part of me wanted distance. Because when someone you trust fully believes something you associate with manipulation, it makes you question your own judgment. We still hang out sometimes. And here's the weird part. When we're together, I forget. They're just my friend again. Then I'll be driving home, and it hits me like cold water. They're in it, and the shock returns, fresh, like I'm discovering it for the first time.